The distress signal hit every receiver in the outer rim at 0300 hours, and nobody moved. That was the thing about the Galactic Senate's emergency channels. They crackled with fire and static and the screams of dying crew members, and the 17 civilized species of the known galaxy sat in their council chairs and ran calculations. Casualty projections, resource costs, political risk. The Vorakai Empire was collapsing from the inside, its emperor dead without a proper heir, its treasury bleeding dry through civil war, and every senator in that chamber knew that whoever stepped in to stabilize it would inherit either a fortune or a corpse. They chose to wait. Colonel Eli Grant did not wait. He was 34 years old, a former United States Army Ranger turned galactic freight hauler, currently eating a protein bar on the bridge of his mid-size cargo ship, the Iron County, parked in a refueling dock at Station 9 above the planet Droon. He heard the signal. He read the manifest attached to it. He looked at the coordinates. Then he punched in the jump sequence before he finished chewing. The Iron County was not a warship. It had 2 defensive railguns he had installed himself, a crew of 6, including himself, and a cargo hold full of medical nanite canisters bound for the colony on Varus 3. The signal said the Vorakai Palace Station was under siege by a separatist fleet of 11 vessels. The signal also said the last surviving members of the Imperial family were aboard that station, requesting immediate extraction under Galactic Law, Protection Class 1. The Protection Class 1 meant any vessel responding was immune from hostile fire under treaty. It also meant the responding vessel assumed temporary legal guardianship of the protected parties until they could be transferred to a recognized authority. Eli had read that clause once in a certification exam 3 years ago and mostly forgotten it. He remembered it now. The jump took 4 minutes. When the Iron County dropped out of faster-than-light travel, it dropped directly into a debris field. The separatist fleet had already torn through the station's outer ring. Hull plates the size of buildings tumbled past the view screen. Eli's navigator, a young man named Corey, made a sound that was not a word. Eli had already opened the comm. Separatist fleet. This is Colonel Eli Grant aboard the Iron County, flagged under Terran Charter and Galactic Transport Authority registration. I am responding to a Protection Class 1 signal from this station. Under Article 7 of the Galactic Compact, you are required to hold fire and permit extraction. I am logging this communication as legal notice. Grant out. There was a pause of about 4 seconds. Then the separatist fleet opened fire on him. Eli had expected that. What he had not expected was the station itself firing back on his behalf. 3 of its remaining defense turrets, still operational in the inner ring, swiveled and engaged the lead separatist vessel with everything they had left. The distraction bought him 8 seconds of clean approach. 8 seconds was enough. He slammed the Iron County into the station's emergency docking collar at a speed that rattled every bolt on the ship, magnetic clamps engaging with a sound like a freight train stopping. Corey was already at the door controls. The rest of the crew had weapons out. Eli ran through the connecting corridor with his rifle up and his boots clanging on metal that had been scorched and bent and was leaking atmosphere from 3 separate points. What he found inside the station was not an army. It was a room. In the room, there were 12 Vorakai Imperial Guards in cracked ceremonial armor, arranged in a tight formation around a central point. 4 of them were dead, propped up against the walls by their living comrades so the formation would look larger from a distance. The remaining 8 were bleeding from wounds they had bandaged with strips of their own uniforms. At the center of that formation stood 2 figures. The first was tall for a Vorakai, which meant she was tall by any standard in the galaxy. Her name, Eli would learn in the next 30 seconds, was Empress-designate Vi of the Vorkai 7th line, and she was looking at him the way a person looks at something they are not sure is real. She had silver-gray skin, 4 fingers on each hand, and eyes that were a deep, luminous amber. She wore the remnants of a formal state gown that had been torn above the knee so she could move faster. In her right hand, she held a blade. The second figure stood slightly behind her and to her left. She was shorter, more slender, wrapped in an intelligence officer's dark uniform. Her name, Eli would also learn, was Director Kane, head of Imperial Intelligence, and she was the one who had actually sent the distress signal. She was also holding a blade. Her eyes, a cooler shade of pale gold, moved to Eli, to his ship behind him, to his crew, and then back to Eli with an expression that was performing calm while running 17 calculations behind it. Eli lowered his rifle. "Colonel Eli Grant," he said. "I got your signal. We have about 90 seconds before that docking collar fails. Who's coming?" The Empress-designate looked at him for one more moment. Then she sheathed her blade and said, "Everyone." They moved. The 8 surviving guards carried their dead. Eli's crew took wounded. Director Kane ran with a sealed data case, handcuffed to her wrist, and a look on her face like she had already anticipated this exact scenario, and still found it slightly beneath her dignity. The Empress walked at the center of it all. And she walked the way certain people walk when they have decided that dying running is still better than dying standing still. They made it back through the corridor in 40 seconds. The Iron County detached from the docking collar at exactly the moment it failed. The Separatist fleet fired 17 shots at them during the 3 seconds it took to calculate a jump. The Iron County took 2 hits, one to the aft plating, one to a cargo container in the hold that was fortunately empty. Then the jump drive engaged, and the stars turned to light, and the chaos behind them became silence. Eli stood on his bridge with his protein bar still in his hand, half-eaten, and looked at the view screen showing nothing but the streaked blue of faster-than-light travel. His first mate, a woman named Diane, leaned against the navigation console and said, "So, we have an Empress on our ship." Eli took another bite of the protein bar. "Yeah," he said, "and we just declared ourselves her legal guardians under Galactic Compact law." "Technically, yes." Diane was quiet for a moment. "Eli," she said, "what does that actually mean?" He thought about it. "I'm not completely sure," he said honestly. In the cargo hold that had been hastily converted into a medical bay, Director Kane opened her data case, removed a small sealed document, and read through it with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what it meant. She permitted herself one small, quiet exhale. Then she sealed it again. The ship arrived at Neutral Station Vareth 6 hours later, and by the time Eli Grant stepped off the Iron County, 3 Galactic Senate observers were already waiting on the docking platform. That was the first sign something significant had happened. The second sign was that the observers were not looking at the Empress-designate. They were looking at Eli. He was still in his work jacket with the Iron County's logo on the chest. He had a cup of station coffee in one hand and a deeply confused expression. Diane was one step behind him, and she had the specific look of someone who had been reading legal documents for the past 6 hours and had found something alarming. The lead observer, a tall gray-feathered being from the species called the Turath, he'd extended both hands in the formal greeting reserved for recognized legal representatives of sovereign entities. "Colonel Grant," it said, "we are here to formally acknowledge the protection and temporary legal custodianship you have assumed under Article 7 of the Galactic Compact. We are also here to inform you that under Sections 7 through 14 of the same compact, your custodianship carries with it specific legal implications regarding the Vorkai imperial succession, which we are required to present to you in full." Eli looked at Diane. Diane looked at her tablet. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That's the part I found." The Vorkai Empire, as Eli would spend the next 4 hours learning, had a succession law that was 1,700 years old and had never been seriously challenged because no one had ever needed to use it. Under the original imperial charter, if the throne passed to a designate who was unmarried at the time of her investiture, and if she was under the legal custodianship of a non-Vorkai party at the time the custodianship was formalized, then by imperial law, that custodian became a co-heir of the imperial estate until such time as the succession was formally resolved. Co-heir of the imperial estate, which included, depending on which part of the Vorkai treasury had survived the Civil War, somewhere between 60 and 90 billion galactic credits in assets, resource rights to 7-star systems, nanosea, and a fleet of ships that was currently hiding in 3 separate deep space anchorages, waiting for the Civil War to end. Eli sat in the station's legal mediation chamber, a room designed to feel important with its dark paneling and its formal lighting. And he read through the document that Director Kayan slid across the table to him. She had placed it there herself, calmly, and then folded her hands and watched him read with an expression that gave nothing away. Empress Designate Veya sat across the table as well. She had changed out of the torn gown into a simpler garment, dark gray, and she was watching him read with an expression that was harder to place. Not the same calculation as Cain. Something more direct, something that was deciding something. Eli finished reading. He set the document down. "This says," he said carefully, "and that because I assumed custodianship of the Empress Designate before her investiture was formalized, I am legally entitled to a share of the imperial estate." "That is correct," Director Kayan said, "and that share is commensurate with a co-inheriting spouse." "Also correct." Eli looked at the document again. "So, under Vorkai imperial law," he said, "I'm not just a custodian, I'm a designated heir." "Effectively," Kayan said. "Yes. The law is old. It was written to prevent hostile powers from holding an Empress Designate in custodianship and claiming leverage over the throne. It was designed to be activated by a trusted ally, someone the Empress chose." She paused. While the fact that it was activated by a stranger is an irregularity the law does not fully account for. But it still applies. It still applies. Eli sat back in his chair. On his side of the table, Diane was writing something very fast on her tablet. Corey, who had followed them in, was staring at the ceiling with the expression of someone doing math they did not study for. Eli looked at the Empress. She was still watching him, still deciding. "You saved my people," she said. It was the first thing she had said directly to him since they boarded the Iron County. Her voice was lower than he had expected and cleaner, and she chose her words the way someone chooses where to place their feet in uncertain terrain. "You didn't have to come." "The signal was a protection class one," Eli said. "No, 17 other ships received that signal," Director Kayan said. "None of them responded." Eli thought about that. He thought about the station, the 8 guards carrying their dead so the formation would look larger. The Empress walking toward him with a blade still in her hand and no panic on her face. "Well," he said finally, "somebody had to." The Empress looked at him for a long moment. Then she said something in Vorkai that the translation system didn't immediately catch. Director Kayan, after a brief pause, translated it. "She says," Kayan said, with the smallest shift in her tone that might have been appreciation, "that she is beginning to understand humans." The Galactic Senate observers formally entered the record of Eli Grant's custodianship that evening. The Imperial estate, all 67 billion credits of surviving assets, was placed in joint recognition pending formal resolution of succession. In the station's legal offices, 11 different species legal representatives began filing paperwork that would take 3 years to fully untangle. And in a small observation lounge overlooking the docking bays, Eli Grant sat with his coffee going cold in his hands and watched ships come and go and tried to figure out exactly what had just happened to his life. Director Kane found him there an hour later. She sat without being invited and was quiet for a moment, watching the ships with him. "You're wondering if you made a mistake," she said. "I'm wondering what I actually signed up for," Eli said. "Those are different questions." He looked at her. She had set the data case on the seat beside her. The handcuff was gone, removed now that they were in a secure location. Without it, she looked less like an intelligence officer and more like something harder to categorize. "The Empire is real," she said. "The assets are real. The legal inheritance is real." She paused. "What is also real is that the people who started the Civil War are still out there. They know the Empress survived. They know someone extracted her. And they will find out who very quickly. So this comes with enemies," Eli said. "Everything worth having does," Kane said. She stood, picked up the data case, and walked toward the door. "Colonel Grant," she said without turning around. "For what it is worth, in 20 years of intelligence work, I have met 3 people who would have jumped into that situation without calculating the odds first." She paused at the doorway. "You are the first one I would have trusted to come out the other side." She left. Eli sat with his cold coffee and the weight of 67 billion credits and 2 women who both moved through the world, like they had already seen how every room ends. He drank the coffee anyway. Somewhere in the docking bay below, the Iron County sat in its berth, its hull still showing the scorch marks from 2 separatist hits, looking exactly like what it was, a mid-size cargo hauler that had gotten itself into something much larger than its weight class. Eli had always liked it for that. The Vorkai Civil War had been running for 2 years before Eli Grant ever heard the word Vorkai, and it had been started over something that sounded almost boring on paper: inheritance rights. The old emperor, Karev V, had died without a named male heir, which under traditional Vorkai succession law should have ended the 7th line entirely and transferred the throne to a contested council of regional governors. What Karev had done instead, in the last 8 months of his life, was rewrite the succession law. He had named his daughter Veye as Empress Designate. He had appointed Director Kayan as the legal architect of the new succession framework. And then he had died before the framework could be ratified by the Imperial Senate. That gap, those 3 weeks between his death and the Senate's ratification vote, was all the separatists had needed. 4 regional governors had broken away, taken their fleets, and started the Civil War. Eli learned all of this in briefings over the following 2 days, delivered by Kayan with the methodical precision of someone who had lived inside this story for 3 years and had distilled it down to its essential structure. She sat across from him in the station's conference room each morning and laid out the political landscape like a strategic map. And Eli listened the way he had been trained to listen in the army. Looking for the terrain, looking for the angles, looking for what was not being said. On the morning of the 3rd day, he said, "You planned for the possibility of a human guardian." Kayan looked at him. "The law was specific," he said. "Article 7, Protection Class 1. Custodianship triggers the co-heir clause. That's not something you stumble onto, but you had to have researched it." A pause. I researched every possible extraction scenario, Kane said. The human custodianship outcome was one of 42 contingencies I modeled. But you sent the signal on a frequency that would reach human ships first. Another pause, this one longer. Humans respond to distress signals, she said. Other species respond to political calculations. Eli nodded slowly. So, you needed someone who would come without thinking about the politics. I needed someone who would come, Kane said. The rest, I was prepared to manage. Manage, Eli said, meaning the co-heir situation. The legal outcome is messy, Kane said. It is also survivable. The Empire is not surviving the alternative, which was the Empress dying on that station. Eli thought about that. And now, he said. Now, Kane said. We have a working custodianship, a legally recognized co-inheritance, and 67 billion credits in frozen assets that will unfreeze the moment succession is formally resolved. She set her hands flat on the table. The fastest path to formal resolution is investiture, and investiture requires stability. Stability requires ending the Civil War, and ending the Civil War requires resources and legitimacy. She met his eyes. You now possess both. You want me to help finish the war, Eli said. I want you to help save the Empire, Kane said. Those are different things. The war is a symptom. The Empire is what matters. Eli looked at her for a moment. You're very good at this, he said. Yes, she said, without pretending otherwise. Does the Empress know you designed the scenario that landed me here? The Empress, Kane said, is considerably more perceptive than most people give her credit for. She stood, picked up her data case. She has not asked me to confirm it, which means she already knows and has decided how she feels about it. And how does she feel about it? Kane paused at the door. She said, Kane said, that she would have chosen differently, which from her is not criticism. It is analysis. She left. Eli sat with the map of Vorkai's space on the screen in front of him, and the weight of everything Kane had just laid out, and the particular feeling of being a very capable person who had just walked into a situation that was going to require him to be more capable still. He had felt this feeling before. In the army, usually. In the mountains of a country that didn't want him there. With objectives that kept changing, with the understanding that the only way out was through. He pulled the map closer. The 4 separatist governors were named in the briefing files. Their fleets were documented. Their supply lines were laid out. Their political alliances, which were fragile and built on mutual distrust, were annotated in Kane's handwriting with the specific note, "These alliances will fracture under pressure if the pressure is applied correctly." Eli read that note twice. Then he pulled up his communications board and called Diane. She answered immediately, which meant she had been waiting. "You've seen the briefing files," he said. "Been reading them for 12 hours, she said. "What do you think?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that this empire is worth saving. The briefings on Vorkai civilian populations, the resource distribution plans, the humanitarian programs the old emperor was running. This isn't a rotten empire looking for a new head. It's a functioning society with a succession crisis." She paused. "I also think that we, personally, are now a target, and that doing nothing is not actually an option anymore." "Yeah," Eli said. "So we're doing this. We're doing this." Another pause. "Eli," Diane said, "when you answered that distress signal, did you know any of this was possible?" He thought about the moment. The protein bar, the signal, the jump sequence. "No," he said honestly. Would it have changed your decision? He thought about 8 guards carrying their dead to make the formation look larger. He thought about a woman with a blade and no panic on her face, walking toward a stranger because the stranger was the only option. "No," he said. Diane made a sound that was mostly a breath, but contained a whole sentence worth of feeling. "All right," she said. "Then let's go save an empire." The first separatist governor to feel Eli Grant's presence in the war was a Vorkai military commander named Governor Ress of the Eastern Reach, and he felt it through his fuel supply. Eli did not attack Ress directly. Attacking Ress directly would have required a fleet Eli did not have. What Eli had was 3 things: 67 billion credits in frozen assets that could be partially accessed through emergency imperial protocols, a detailed understanding of supply chain logistics from 12 years of running cargo routes, and Director Kane's annotated map of every political weakness in the Separatist alliance. The Eastern Reach was the largest of the 4 Separatist territories, and its fleet was the most powerful. But its fuel came from a single refinery network that ran through 3 neutral transit stations. Ress had been paying those stations in political promises and future trade contracts because his hard currency was tied up in the war effort. Eli simply paid them more. In real credits, transferred immediately, with long-term supply contracts attached that were more valuable than anything Reyes had offered. It took 9 days and 4 separate negotiation sessions run by Diane and a Vorkai legal representative that Kayan had retained. On the 10th day, the transit stations rerouted their fuel shipments, and Governor Ress's Eastern Fleet went from 6 weeks of operational fuel reserve to 11 days overnight. The message came through official channels, relayed by the Galactic Senate's Neutral Communications Network. Governor Ress was requesting a ceasefire negotiation. In the station's communication center, Kayan read the message and did not smile, because Kayan did not smile at expected outcomes. She set the message down and said, "The other 3 governors will know what happened within 48 hours. "Good," Eli said. "They will see it as a demonstration of intent." "That's what it is," Eli said. Kane looked at him. "You're not going to threaten them," she said. It was not a question. "Threatening people who have already committed to a war doesn't work," Eli said. "You have to give them a reason to want a different outcome." Ress didn't fold because we scared him. He folded because he did the math, and the math said the war wasn't winnable anymore. "You want to give all 4 governors the same calculation?" "I want to make the calculation obvious," Eli said. "So obvious they do the math themselves and arrive there before I have to push." Kane was quiet for a moment. "The old emperor used to say," she said, "that the best war is the one that ends before the second shot." She paused. He was not always able to practice it. The political pressures of the Senate made restraint difficult. "I don't have a Senate to answer to," Eli said. "Not yet," Kane said. There was something in that Eli filed away without responding to. The Empress-designate found him that evening on the Iron County's observation deck. She came alone, which meant she had either evaded her guards or told them to stay back. And the absence of them changed the shape of the conversation before it started. Without the formal perimeter, she was simply a woman standing in a modest gray garment looking out at the stars with the same quality of attention she gave to everything, complete with no part of herself held back. Eli had noticed this about her early. She did not half-do things, not walking, not looking, not thinking. It was a kind of presence that took up its full space without pushing. He did not stand when she came in because she had told him on the second day, with the particular directness that he was learning was her natural register. that human customs of deference made her uncomfortable. She sat in the adjacent seat instead. For a while, they both looked at the stars. "Res has requested ceasefire terms," she said. "Yes." "Kane told me how you did it." "She was the one with the political map," Eli said. "I just read it." "She says you read it better than most of her analysts." She paused. "She does not say that easily." I noticed. Another moment of stars. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I want you to answer it honestly, which I am told humans sometimes find difficult under political pressure." "I'll do my best," Eli said. She turned to look at him directly, and there was something in those amber eyes that was serious in the way specific gravity is serious. Not heavy for show, just dense and real. "Do you want the Empire?" she said. "The assets, the territory, the inheritance. Not politically, not legally. Personally. Is this something you want?" He thought about it properly, almost the way the question deserved. "I want the Empire to work," he said. "I want those 8 guards who carried their dead to have a country worth dying for. I want the people in your humanitarian programs to get what they were promised." He paused. "The credits are a tool. The territory is a responsibility. That's how I'm looking at it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is the correct answer. Is it the honest one?" "I think," she said, "it is both." Another pause. "My father used to say that power reveals character, not creates it. The character was always there. The power simply makes it visible." Eli thought about that. "What's it revealing about me?" he said. She considered him for a long moment with those amber eyes. And Eli had the particular experience of being seen by someone who was very good at seeing. "Patience," she said, "and the specific kind of stubbornness that does not look like stubbornness until it has already won." She turned back to the stars. "It is a useful combination." They sat together as the stars moved and the station turned slowly in its orbit. And nobody said anything else. And somehow that was the most significant conversation Eli Grant had ever had without speaking. In the data case in Kayan's quarters, sealed and documented and legally witnessed, were 2 sets of papers. The first was the formal record of Eli Grant's legal custodianship and co-inheritance under Vorakai imperial law, signed and registered with the Galactic Compact. The second was something Kayan had not told Eli about yet. The old emperor, in the same revision of the succession law that had named Vey his heir, had included a secondary clause. It was a clause specifically about the nature of co-inheritance. It said that a co-heir of imperial standing, upon formal investiture of the designated empress, would be recognized not only as a co-heir of the estate, but as a co-heir of the throne itself. It said this clearly, in 3 separate places, with 2 separate sets of witnesses. Kayan had read it 17 times in the first week. She had modeled the political implications from 46 different angles. She had concluded that the clause was ironclad, deliberate, and the old emperor's way of ensuring that whoever ended up saving his daughter would be someone with both the capacity and the character to deserve standing beside her. She had not told Eli yet because the timing mattered. She would tell him after Res. She would tell him after all 4 governors, actually. She would tell him when the war was over and the empire was stable, and Eli Grant had finished demonstrating, to the satisfaction of any galactic court that cared to examine the record, that he was exactly what the law required him to be. She looked at the sealed document one more time. She sealed the case. She permitted herself, alone in her quarters, a second quiet exhale. And she thought, not for the first time, that the old emperor had been a difficult man in many ways. But he had understood one thing with perfect clarity. The right person, given the right circumstances, will always show you who they are. The second governor to break was the one nobody expected. Governor Sen of the Inner Trade Worlds was the youngest of the four, 31 years old. A political inheritor who had joined the Separatist Alliance not from genuine ideological conviction, but because his three senior governors had presented him with a document and told him signing it was survival. He had signed. He had kept his head down. He had run his territory's economy with a competence that Kane's files noted in a brief marginal annotation as the primary reason he was still alive 2 years into a war. The other governors had been running badly. Eli read that annotation 3 times. Then he sent a personal message through neutral channels, not a formal negotiation request, not a legal document. A message. 3 lines. It said, "You know how this ends. You're too smart not to. Call me before the others make it worse for everyone." Sen called him 6 hours later. The conversation lasted 40 minutes and was conducted in the direct, logistically focused register of 2 people who were both more interested in outcomes than performance. Sen wanted a guarantee that his territory's trade relationships would survive the succession resolution. He wanted assurance that his personal role in the Civil War would be treated as a matter of political coercion rather than deliberate aggression. He wanted 2 things that were both reasonable and that Eli could actually provide. Eli provided them. Kane, listening from an adjacent room as she had done with all negotiations, made a note in her files. "He reads people," she wrote, "not as a skill he practices, but as a thing he simply does. This is dangerous in the wrong hands." She paused. She added, "It is not in the wrong hands." 2 governors remained. The governors Har and Devon were different from Res and Sen. They were older, more invested, more defined by the war itself. Har had military background and a fleet admiral's mentality. He thought in engagements, in control of space and resource lines, in the mathematics of force projection. Devon was a political ideologue who had spent 30 years believing the Vorakai 7th line was an illegitimate dynasty, and who had wrapped his entire identity around the separatist cause. "Harsh, we can reach through logistics," Eli told Diane and Kane in the morning briefing. "Same approach as Res, wider scale. He's extended and he knows it. We make the cost-benefit calculation impossible to ignore." "And Devon?" Diane said. Eli looked at the file. Devon's fleet was the smallest of the 4 remaining governors. His territory was economically marginal. His ideological position was documented in 87 public statements over 3 decades. His military strength depended entirely on his alliance with Har, because without Har's fleet covering his flanks, Devon's territory was indefensible. "Devon folds when Har folds," Eli said, "not because he changes his mind, because he has no more moves." "He will not accept terms," Kane said. "Ideological actors rarely do. He will see negotiation as capitulation." "I'm not going to offer him negotiation," Eli said. "I'm going to offer him a historical record." Kane looked at him. "Meaning?" "He wants his cause documented," Eli said. "He wants someone to have heard it. 30 years of ideology, and he's been shouting it into a political void because the empire he's opposing never bothered to formally engage with his arguments." Eli paused. "I'll engage with his arguments. Formally. On the record. Through the Galactic Compact's official proceedings." He paused again. "It doesn't mean agreeing with him. It means treating him like a political actor with a position worth formally answering, rather than a criminal to be prosecuted." The room was quiet for a moment. "That," Kane said slowly, "is either very naive or very sophisticated. "Which do you think?" Eli said. She looked at him for a moment with those pale gold eyes. "I think," she said, "that it is the kind of sophisticated that looks like naivety to people who have never seen it work. Har's fleet ran its fuel calculation on the 14th day after Ress's ceasefire and reached out through back channels within 24 hours. The negotiation was straightforward because Har was straightforward. He wanted clear terms, guaranteed fleet disposition agreements, and a role in the reconstituted imperial military for officers who had served under him. Eli gave him all three, with Kayan handling the legal architecture and Diane handling the logistics. Devon's response to the formal proceedings offer came 9 days later. He accepted. He accepted not with warmth and not with capitulation. He accepted with the careful dignity of a man who had been fighting a war he could no longer win and who had just been offered the one thing his 3 decades of opposition had never received: an official answer. The formal proceedings took 4 days. Eli sat through all of it, and he listened. And where Devon made arguments that had merit, he said so, and where they did not, he said that too, clearly and without contempt. And when it was over, Devon's public statement to the Galactic Compact was brief and contained 3 words that his intelligence files suggested he had never said in 3 decades of public life. The 3 words were, "The war ends." The Empire's frozen assets unfroze 48 hours after the last ceasefire was signed. In the Imperial Treasury's formal accounting, transmitted through the Galactic Compact's Financial Clearing Authority, the assets of the Vorkai Imperial Estate were listed at 67,240 million galactic credits, plus resource rights to 7-star systems, plus the fleet. Eli sat in the Iron County's cargo hold with the accounting document on a tablet in his hands, and had the particular feeling of a number being too large to feel real. Diane sat beside him, eating an apple. "Say something," she said. "I don't have anything to say," Eli said. "That's a first." He looked at the number again. "I need to call my brother," he said. "Eli," Diane said, "your brother drives a forklift in Ohio." "Yeah," Eli said. "I know." He set the tablet down. "I need to hear a normal voice." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "You're doing okay? And considering." "Considering what?" "Considering you answered a distress signal 6 weeks ago while eating a protein bar, and now you're a co-heir to a galactic empire." She took another bite of the apple. Most people would be less okay. He thought about that. He thought about the station and the 8 guards, and the way the Empress had walked toward him with a blade she hadn't needed and a calm she had built from some deep interior place where fear didn't get to go. He thought about Kayan and the way she moved through every room like she had already mapped all the exits. He thought about the 4 governors and what it took to end a war not with the loudest weapon, but with the most patient arithmetic. "Diane," he said, "do you think this is going to keep getting more complicated?" She considered it honestly. "Yes," she said. "Me too," he said. He picked up the tablet again. He called his brother. Kane asked to see him alone 2 days after the final ceasefire. This was not unusual. Kane saw him alone regularly, in the briefing room, in the communication center, in the station's legal offices where the succession documents were being assembled. What was unusual was the way she asked. She sent a written message instead of finding him in person. The message said, "There is something in the succession documents I should have told you earlier. I am telling you now." Eli went. She was already in the briefing room when he arrived, seated at the table with the data case open in front of her. The sealed secondary document was laid flat on the table, unsealed. He sat. She said, "And I owe you honesty about what I designed and what I withheld." "All right," he said. She walked him through it without editorializing. The old emperor's succession law revision, the secondary clause, the specific language about co-heirs of the throne, the way she had positioned the distress signal frequency, the 42 contingencies, including this one. When she finished, Eli sat with it for a moment. "So," he said, "I'm not just a co-heir of the estate." "No," she said. "Under formal investiture, I become a co-heir of the throne." "Yes." "Meaning the succession law, as written, makes me co-ruler." "That is the legal read," Kane said. "There are political and diplomatic complications that would take years to fully resolve. The Galactic Senate would have opinions. Other Vorkai political factions would contest it." She paused. But the law, as written and as witnessed, and as legally registered with the Galactic Compact, is clear." Eli looked at the document. "Does the Empress know?" he said. "Yes," Kane said. "She has known since before we reached Vareth." "And she didn't tell me." "She wanted to see," Kane said, "what you would do without knowing." Eli sat with that. He thought about the Empress on the observation deck, asking him directly if he wanted the Empire. Personally, not politically. He thought about what he had answered. "She was testing me," he said. "She was understanding you," Kane said. "There is a difference. A test has a passing grade. Understanding is ongoing." A pause. She understood what she needed to understand. What did she understand? Kane was quiet for a moment, and this pause was different from her usual pauses. Less calculated, more considered. "She understood," Kane said, "that you would have done the same things regardless of whether you knew about the throne clause. That the choices you made came from what you are, not from what you expected to gain." She paused again. "That is the only kind of person she would share the throne with." Eli looked at the document. He thought about 67 billion credits and 7 star systems and a fleet still waiting in 3 deep space anchorages and 8 guards carrying their dead, and the specific arithmetic of ending a war before the second shot. He thought about what it meant to be given something you had not come looking for. "I have a question," he said. "Yes," Kane said, "and I want you to answer it honestly." She met his eyes. "Always," she said. "When you designed this," Eli said, "all 42 contingencies, the signal frequency, the legal architecture, when you designed me into this position." He paused. "Did you design it for the Empire, or for her?" Kane looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I designed it for both." Another pause, shorter this time. "And eventually, for a third reason I was not entirely prepared to account for." "Which is?" She looked at the document, then back at him. "I have been the only person she trusted completely for 9 years," Kane said. "That is a significant weight, for both of us." A pause. "I wanted her to have someone else." Eli held the quiet that followed. Then he said, "And you?" She blinked. Just once. The smallest and most human thing he had ever seen her do. "I," she said carefully. "I'm still accounting for that." The investiture of Empress Vey of the Vorkai's 7th line took place 12 weeks later, in the restored Imperial Hall on Vorkai Prime, before a full session of the Galactic Senate, with representatives of all 17 recognized species present. Eli Grant stood beside her. He wore the formal attire that Kane had spent 3 weeks sourcing and a tailor had spent 2 weeks constructing. Dark charcoal with the deep copper trim of the 7th line, and he wore it the way he wore the rest of it. As a responsibility, not a costume. The Empress stood on his left, and she was everything the Empire needed her to be in that moment, which was considerable and she carried it the same way she had carried everything Eli had seen her carry. Completely, with no part of herself held back. Director Kane stood directly behind them both. The ceremony was formal and long and rich with ritual that Eli did not fully understand and had spent 3 weeks studying. When it came to the moment that required him to speak, he spoke the words in Vorkai that he had practiced until they came out clean. And then he spoke them again in English for the Galactic record, because the legal register required acknowledgement in the claimant's native tongue. He said, "I accept this responsibility in full. I will carry it honestly. I will carry it with patience. And I will carry it for the benefit of every living person in this empire. Not just the ones who asked me to." He said it looking forward at the assembled senators and diplomats and military officers and government officials, because it was not a private statement. It was a public one. It was, in the best tradition of the kind of people who answer distress signals without calculating the odds, a promise made loudly on the record. The Galactic Senate formally recognized the dual investiture at the end of the ceremony. Outside the hall, in the restored plaza of Vorkai Prime's capital city, the population had gathered in the kind of numbers that happen when a 2-year civil war ends, and someone needs to see it end with their own eyes. Eli looked out at them from the steps and had the feeling, vast and grounding simultaneously, of a weight that was real and had to be respected and was not going to get lighter. He was all right with that. On the steps, the Empress stood beside him and did not touch him in any way visible to the crowd, because the political optics of the moment required careful management. But she turned her head slightly, at an angle that was visible only to him, and she looked at him with those amber eyes that decided things, and the thing they were deciding was settled. Kayan stood 2 steps behind them, data case at her side, expression composed, and watched the crowd with the attention of someone who was always simultaneously managing the present moment and preparing for the next one. Eli caught her eye once. She gave him a look that contained several things at once, in the layered way that was entirely hers. He gave her one back. Then he looked out at the crowd again, and at the Empire, and at the 7 star systems and the fleet and the 67 billion credits and all the responsibility that had started with a distress signal and a protein bar. And he thought about his brother in Ohio driving a forklift, and about the Army, and about 12 years of cargo routes, and the specific fact that none of it had been wasted because all of it had made him the kind of person who answered when nobody else did. That, in the end, was the whole story. Everything after was just the work. And Eli Grant, who had always been better at work than almost anything else, went to do it.